What would you say if someone asked about your past?
That's a really good question.
About your privilege?
I came from working class, rural Appalachia. I didn't really have a lot of privileges.
About your race?
You actually don't have to try to out-white white folks.
We're traveling the country to listen to the stories of racial healing. Next stop, Aspen, Colorado. Aspen may not be the first place that comes to mind when talking about race, but every year people from around the world travel here to share their ideas. So we asked a few of them to sit down with Monica Haslip, the founder of Little Black Pearl and Art Design Academy.
As a racial healing practitioner, I usually invite a group of people to share their stories in a circle. Because most times in my own experience, I've learned that that's where the magic happens. That's where people change. That's where hearts are changed. That's when people go into their seat of power and they make different decisions. Today in Aspen, we're going to do things a little differently. We're going to invite individuals to share their stories. Feel free to have a seat.
All right.
So tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I grew up in a small town in West Virginia with about 800 people total.
Oh,
yeah, so when I say small, I mean
That's
small,
very
like
small.
Rural Appalachia. And growing up, it was just like very working class family, you know, not a lot of diversity.
Okay.
But I was lucky because I played basketball and I played it well. So I was able to earn a college scholarship to play. And I think, you know, on those travels with basketball, it really became like such a passport for me, you know, to see the United States and then to see the world and to see like life and how big it is and how diverse and amazing, like all of these lived experiences and so different from my little kind of insular town.
Yeah. If you think back on your experience growing up, when was the first time you really can sort of identify when you focused in on your own identity as a Latina?
Yeah, so it was, I think with any other teenager, it was around that time. But I also went to a Catholic school, all girls Catholic school.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I really came into being with other folks outside of my ethnic background and race. There was predominantly Filipino and white, and then the mixture of Latinos there. So it was kind of like in your face of, you know, a shared religion, but differences in background. So that was my kind of entrance into realizing that there was different dynamics at play.
Tell me about growing up in Dallas. You know, obviously, did you grow up in the city or?
Oh yeah, I'm a city kid.
Okay.
So I grew up in the city in Dallas, in the southwest side of Dallas called Oak Cliff, going to public schools, and wrestling with all the things. My older brother was murdered in what is now defined as a mass murder, so among with three other people in the neighborhood around the corner from my grandmother's house. Both of my sisters, and actually ultimately all three of my sisters, ended up being younger moms than they wanted to be necessarily with the options that were there for them. And so in many ways, you know, the typification of the kinds of issues we were talking about from a wider kind of social strata for quote unquote the inner city in the 1990s for Black families, we were wrestling with, largely with anchoring and strong leadership of my mom.
So had your family talked about race or racism when you were growing up?
You know what? It's hard because you don't talk about what's not there, right? Like there's the absence of it. We never really talked about it, to be honest. And then I started playing basketball and, you know, I had a teammate, Tiffany, who became my best friend from, you know, another town, like about an hour away from where I lived. And it was a totally different lived experience. Tiff was from a Black family. Because we were friends on the court, then it's like, oh, I'm experiencing, you know, life at your house. We're having sleepovers. We're trying each other's food. We're listening to each other's music. And Like it just felt great, right? To share life with someone and to learn something new. But then I started to understand, I think, how much more complicated it was than just two girls who were best friends on a basketball court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did it feel like for you when you and Tiffany sort of developed your relationship, and then you were going back home to a community where there were probably no people of color, right?
Yeah, it didn't feel weird in that moment. I think what felt like there was difference is when we started to travel outside of the state and we started playing tournaments against, other teams, and it was like, the way the gym felt, right? Or the types of conversations coaches had with you when you would play a team that was all Black, right? Made up of players that were all African American coaches, fans, and it was really interesting. Like I can even remember at 11 feeling like these conversations are weird.
Did you and Tiffany talk about it?
I think, everyone has a different lived experience and everyone has a story, and you feel different from all of the girls on the team. But then when I understood, some of the ways that she had been discriminated against, some of the things that she had been called, some of the ways that, doors didn't open for her, it was really eye-opening.
My children are growing up. Big shift in my life, going from inner city kid to suburban dad. So my remarkably creative 15-year-old who enjoys nature and is inspired by it, to engage in visual art and to draw, likes to take walks. And I just tell them, look, I appreciate you taking walks, man, but I got to know where you're going and when you go.
Yeah.
Walking around this diverse but still predominantly white an AAPI neighborhood. So those are my worries. How will people see them? This same loving, in so many ways, cherubic and naive 15-year-old is the tallest person in my house. I stand 5'11", and he stands over me at 15. And I know all the things about how we see Black boys as older. Yeah. And I know there's a 13-year-old in that body that is 15 and people project it as 20.
Yes.
And want to treat him that way.
Yeah.
And so those are the things I worry about.
Tell me a little bit about what led you to the work that you're doing around racial justice, gender justice.
I started studying sociology when I went to college because I wanted to understand, in fairness, why do some people have access to some things? And I read Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the White Knapsack. And I realized then, I was like, oh man, yes, I can go into any store and I can find a Band-Aid that fits the color of my skin. I can go anywhere and find hair care products. I can walk into a gas station and not be followed around like a suspect. I didn't understand privilege because I came from working class, rural Appalachia. I didn't really have a lot of privileges. But then when I understood that article, and I was like, yeah, this world is built for me. Yeah. It is built by people like me to represent me. And then I knew, like, oh, there is a lot of change we have to make.
So you've had the opportunity to see your influence in a space where we don't often feel connected or seen.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely do advocate for people being behind the scenes of more Latino, Latinas in museum spaces, but also the content that comes at the forefront, right? So I will say I've had, if very minuscule, I do think I have had some impact because I am hyper aware of what is being put out, what is being said, and who also gets to be behind the scenes.
If you could talk to the, 13, 14-year-old Patty and give her some guidance and some advice on some of the things you would encourage her to think about and to do if she's on that similar journey that you've been on.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Can you take a moment?
Sure, please.
I think the altitude is also getting to me right now. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 13-year-old Patty didn't quite know what she wanted in life. And so, yeah, just the fact that I made it to the largest and most kind of well-known museum institutions in the world is kind of a big accomplishment.
What would be the most important information you feel like you would need to share with 11, 12-year-old Starsky?
Yeah, if I could talk to 11, 12-year-old Starsky, I would try to get him to understand that what people were selling to him about what success looked like was not the only way, and maybe not the way for him at all. Husband, wife, 2.5 kids, and a dog, and a picket fence in the suburbs. But the Black family structure that he came from, that was matriarchal, matrilineal, that centered around Big Mama, and not a concept of male headship that he was trying to figure out, that's not only fine, but flourishing for Black folks. I would challenge him as a Gen Xer to fight code switching.
Yeah.
Right? That you actually don't have to try to out-white white folks. That you're actually good enough, strong enough, and the context will allow for your gifts to make room without you trying to fit into somebody else's box.
So my final question is probably the hardest one, which is, do you believe that we can end racism?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist and I love people. So I believe that if enough people can change the course of history together, then yes, we can. But I think it's going to take all of us. And I think it's going to take a moving away from an individualist society towards a collective we. But it's going to be a hard climb.
While I would like my answer to be yes, 100%, I have seen time and time again that there is outright refusal. And so until that happens, the sheer fundamental humanness of recognizing that within another person, until that happens, and I hold out the feeling that racism can end.
I believe it's possible for racism to end. I don't think it's a sufficient goal for all of our human gifts and talents. I think it's possible to build a better world.
Oftentimes I think discussions about race and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, they can just be philosophical in nature and there's no practical action attached. And I think it was important to reflect on the action and how I can use my position and platform to make a difference.
The conversation we had was the right one for my own self-reflection. And so what I take away from the conversation is a sense of renewal of my own joy.
It was more than what I expected. I, even started crying, but we got in deep real fast, and it was exactly what I needed.
Today really surprised me. There were people who showed up who were willing to have very difficult conversations. And it reminded me that we are not as divided as we think we are.
Changing the narrative starts with sharing stories. Share your story with us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.